Welcome back to the channel, guys. Today's video is going to be a little bit more serious than what I normally do, and it's going to be a little bit more heavy, specifically on history. That's because today we're talking about the Second Amendment and what it truly means. Over the past couple administrations, certain parties have ran really heavily on gun control, and they often talk about the Second Amendment not in its entirety or what it truly means, but by cherry-picking terms and words that over time don't even mean the same thing as the time of the founding. They'll often say things like the Second Amendment is specifically for hunting or for personal self-defense, and that it's not for rebelling against a tyrannical government. But none of that holds up when you actually look at the historical context of the Second Amendment when we refer to the United States Constitution. And even if we go back a little bit further, well, a lot further, and look at some of the ideas founded in the Magna Carta, then you start seeing the whole picture about what the Second Amendment truly means. So let's get into this and have this little bit of history lesson and really see what the Second Amendment truly means. You see, at the end of all my long form videos, I play this clip right here. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Now, what does that truly mean? Well, first of all, we have to take a step back in time and look at both the Magna Carta and the Constitution of the United States of America. In 1215, the Magna Carta was issued. It was one of the first documents that really put into stone that the king and government were not above the law. This very idea was adopted into our Constitution when we wrote the Declaration of Independence. And if you think about it in a way, it kind of goes into really what we're talking about as to what the Second Amendment truly means, because this is one of the first times in human history in which the people were given the power over government and said that government was not absolute. You see, everyone knows that America gained its independence in 1776. However, the actual Constitution of the United States was not ratified until 1788. And once it was ratified, there were several things within the Constitution that had no actual mechanism for actually enforcing or going about actually working the ideas laid out in the Constitution. The sections that are important to the Second Amendment are as follows.
We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such forms as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Prudence indeed will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes. And accordingly, all experience hath shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations pursuing invariably the same object evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security.
So you heard it there. As stated within the Constitution of the United States, it is actually the duty and the right of the people to overthrow their government if it becomes abusive to those of the people. Of course, it also states that it should not be done for little reason, meaning that it shouldn't be small problems that cause the people to rise up. However, once the Constitution was ratified, It took a couple years for there to be any mechanisms in order to actually operate those ideas. Mainly, it took until the ratification of the Bill of Rights in 1791. That is where we get the Second Amendment and what brings us to today. Now let's take a look at the actual wording of the Second Amendment. Another one of the misconceptions that a lot of people on the gun control side actually cite about the Second Amendment is they often say that it's only specifically protecting the military or militias. They often do not do any kind of separation between the militia and what the actual federal military is, the military controlled by the government. So what you have to do is you have to think back to the time of the actual founding. You have to understand our founding fathers had just gone through a war to declare independence against a power that was abusive to them and also tried to disarm them. Now, at the same time, one of the very popular things, and almost in some places actually mandatory, was militia duty. And a militia duty at the time was every person, well, male, 16 and older, that was of fighting capability. And they were essentially, in some places, required to supply their own arms equivalent for military duty. Now, the militia is essentially the people. It is a fighting force put together by the people, for the people, to defend the people, using arms owned and procured by the people. This is one of those things the gun control side really glosses over and doesn't want people to realize, is that you are the militia. The militia is the people. They always try to make it sound like it's only protecting the government and the government's right to keep and bear arms, which doesn't make sense, because the government already has the arms and the power. The government doesn't have any reason to tell itself that it cannot have arms. A lot of people have to understand is that the Bill of Rights is not the government granting rights to the people. It's the government recognizing that there are inalienable rights that the government cannot take away from the people. So next we look at the wording of the Second Amendment as a whole. So let's go through it again. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Now, we went over the first line, a well-regulated militia. But there's another part of that that they often point out, and that's the word regulated. You see, they often try to make the argument that the word regulated means that the government has the right to regulate the Second Amendment and to regulate any arms therefore covered under the Second Amendment. And that's not necessarily true. You see, if we go back to the time of the founding, 1790, regulated had another meaning. It meant well-trained or well-kept. So when you look at the Second Amendment and you replace that first line and replace well-regulated, well, let's just replace the word regulated with trained. Well, a well-trained militia, that makes a huge bit of difference. So that's one thing you have to consider when you look at the Second Amendment, is a lot of the definitions have changed and the way they speak have changed. Now let's go to the next part, being necessary to the security of a free state. Now, a lot of people on that particular side will look at this specific thing, and once again, they'll go back to the government side of it. They'll say, okay, it's a military being necessary to the security of a free state, so the states at the time, they'd say, is America or the individual states. And that's not necessarily true, because state has another meaning, and it means being. So, let's say, we all know all of our states matter. When you refer to a state of matter, you're talking about what it is doing at that time, Not that it is a place or an organization as we think of states today. It is the state of being. So it is a state of being free, not necessarily the state. So that is usually what state means at that time. Now it has multiple definitions, and let's be honest, a lot of stuff back then, when transmitted now, people, they look at it in their own way. But the fact is, state doesn't refer to the states or the nation. It means to the state of being free. And now we look at the right of the people. Well, that's very clear. It's the right of the people. It's an inalienable right. Don't need to go much there. They don't normally bring that part up because they can't really dispute it in any way, because there's no difference in the language between then and now when you have that phrase. And of course, they don't look at the last little section either. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Now, that is another phrase that really hasn't changed much. Shall not be infringed means it can't be infringed upon. It means the government cannot take those rights away. Another argument that the anti-gun lobby will often make is that the Second Amendment does not cover modern arms, because at the time, our founding fathers could have never have predicted the level of technological advances that we've had up until now from then. Well, I've got some news for you. At that time, in the 1700s, and even as far back as the 16 and 1500s, there were multiple shot firearms that existed. Our founding fathers used firearms like the puckle gun, which was a crank-fired multi-shot large cannon that was mounted on ships. There were even some existing semi-automatic rifles that existed at the time. There was one particular rifle that was invented that was a full auto machine gun, though not quite the way that we think of. It had large tubes that had bullets and powder stacked on top of each other, and they had a powder charge in there and a hole for the bullets. And essentially what it would be is it would be ignited from front to back. So as it got ignited from the front, the first charge would light and fire the bullet. And at that time, the powder would burn through the hole into the next powder charge and fire it. Some of these rifles and even larger implements that they had at the time were able to fire up to 60 to 70 rounds. These were used in the Revolutionary War. They weren't very common because they were expensive, they had issues, and they weren't necessarily the most well thought out. But they existed. Our founding fathers had just fought a war to get our independence from a country, a government, a kingdom that was trying to disarm the people. And they had knowledge of technology that could very easily be considered direct ancestors to what we have today. They weren't fools. They knew technology could change. It changed just in their lifetimes. Just in the lifetimes of them, just within their lifetimes. They saw wooden ships go from ironclads. They saw cannons go to breech-loading artillery with exploding cannonballs. It's possible that there were some people that were alive at the time of the Constitution's ratification and the Second Amendment's ratification saw the invention of metallic cartridges. I know there's all small things that we think about now because they're considered outdated by modern technology, but you have to think about it like this. There is without zero question that the First Amendment applies to modern technology, such as phones and the internet and TV. And there's absolutely no denying that the Fourth Amendment prevents unlawful search and seizure as modern technology. The government can't, or well, they're not supposed to, snoop in your phone without permission and without cause. Nobody denies those facts. The Second Amendment is the only right in the Bill of Rights that people try to keep trapped in the 1700s and claim that it has no exact bearing on modern technology. That's just not true. Remember, rights given and rights taken are rarely given back. You see this all over the world. There are many places that had something similar to firearms rights until the government took those rights away. Once those rights are taken, they never gotten back. Look at countries like Germany. Extremely strict gun laws today. A certain man in certain government in the 30s and 40s took away the rights of the people to have their firearms. And well, we all know what happened next. We see it all over the world. And remember, disarming people doesn't necessarily make the world safer. Once again, back in Germany, there was just a mass stabbing just a few days ago. We've seen it in China. 50 people stabbed to death with a knife, kitchen knife. And you see countries like Britain that took away guns for the people a long time ago. And then now they're going after knives, trying to ban knives. And now, because the people have no way to really fight back against the government, they have no right to free speech. They are literally arresting people for memes and just for attending rallies and protest. So in conclusion, the Second Amendment is really easy to understand when it's taken in context with the United States Constitution as shown before. In the Constitution, it said that there was a right and duty of the people to remove and replace the government if it is being unjust to the people. However, there's no mechanism in the Constitution itself for that to happen. That is why we got the Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights gave us the actual mechanisms, the rights needed. Well, it didn't give us, it recognized the rights needed in order to enforce those ideas within the Constitution. So whenever someone you know who might be anti-gun asks about the Constitution and the Second Amendment, and they try to bring up any of those stupid talking points that the gun control lobby tries to talk about, always think about showing them this video and show them where in the Constitution the Second Amendment is actually relevant, which is right up there at the top, to be honest. It's not hard to understand. It really isn't. And to be honest, the gun control lobby really does mental gymnastics to try to show the Second Amendment in a light in which it clearly is not. It doesn't take much brain power when taken with the Constitution to see what the Second Amendment truly means. And really, the only word that they even have any kind of grip on is that one word, regulated. But remember, regulated doesn't just mean controlled. It means trained and maintained, as it did in the time of the founding when the Second Amendment was written. So, I ask all of you, please, if you know somebody who isn't that well versed in the Constitution and their rights, teach them. And regulate yourself in the way that our founding fathers did. Dangerous freedom is far more valuable than peaceful slavery. You can have peace and be a slave, or you can have dangerous freedom where you might have to fight to protect yourself, but in the end, you're free. So please everyone, stay free, protect your rights, and please help share the word by sharing this video. Thank you, and y'all have a good day, and I'll see y'all in the next video.